Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, dear guests, friends of the American University Kyiv. Most of you probably know who I am. So I'm Alexei Shershnyov, Vice President for Administration of AUK, and one of the founding partners of this university. So, welcome to the AUK Talks. For me, it's for the first time, so I'm a little bit worried. First small message, very important. At first, I would like to remind you about security. In case of an air alarm, please proceed immediately to the public shelter inside the Poshtova subway station. Yeah, thank you for that. And you probably know that since 2022, AUK Talks had become a primary platform in Ukraine for gathering global leaders in security, diplomacy, economics, and academia for open and candid public discussions with members of the Ukrainian business, with military and intellectual community. You remember we had a few, I would say, best US generals. We had ASU President Michael Crow, so many others, Deb Cobb from Microsoft North America, so many others. And today we have a privilege of hosting Dr. Evelyn Farkas, the Executive Director of the McCain Institute at Arizona State University, prominent speaker and a big friend of Ukraine. Some information that Dr. Evelyn Farkas has 3 decades of experience working on national security and foreign policy in the US executive legislative branch, private sector, and for international organizations overseas. Prior to McCain Institute, Dr. Farkas was president of Farkas Global Strategies and the senior fellow at the German Marshall Fund, which is important for Ukraine now, I believe, and of the United States and the Atlantic Council. She served from 2012 to 2015 as a Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Russia, Ukraine, Eurasia, also covering the Balkans and Caucasus and conventional arms control. So from 2010 and to 2012, she was a senior advisor to the Supreme Allied Commander in Europe and special advisor to the Secretary of Defense for the NATO Summit. So for us, for all of us, it's a big honor to see you, Dr. Farkas, and your colleagues from McCain Institute. Where are the colleagues? Institute, as we all know, the Institute was inspired by Senator John McCain and his family. Senator McCain was a big friend of Ukraine who fought to create a free, safe, and just world for all. So, and it's a big honor to see that his idea and his name carried on the advancement of democracy and human rights, empowering character-driven leaders. So, Dr. Farkas, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Alexei, Mr. Vice President. Is it working? Okay. Thank you, all of you, for coming here today, for making time, frankly, to hear from an American. I come here really in the spirit of advancing the legacy of Senator McCain and the message that he gave to the Ukrainian people back in December of 2013. Senator McCain, as you may know, had a long history of, frankly, correctly estimating Vladimir Putin. He said, when I looked into his eyes, I saw KGB, KGB. And he understood what Vladimir Putin was all about before many people, certainly in the United States and in, I would say, at least Western Europe, did. He came here on one of his many trips to Ukraine in December of 2013, and he stood atop the Union building and he looked at the Maidan and everyone was freezing, and he was really moved by what he saw. And the next day he gave a speech and he said this to the Ukrainian people. He said, "This is your moment. It is about you and no one else. This is about the future you want for your country, and this is about the future that you deserve. A future in Europe, a future of peace and good relations with all of your neighbors. The destiny you seek lies in Europe. Ukraine will make Europe better, and Europe will make Ukraine better." And he was very clear about this. When he went back to the United States, he fought for Ukraine. He fought for the United States to fight for Ukraine, or at least to provide military, economic, and diplomatic assistance to Ukraine in your fight for independence, for your full sovereignty. And I had the honor of working in the Pentagon at the time, in the Defense Department, when he was still a senator fighting for Ukraine and was part of that fight. And so really, I felt that it was important to come here today to this university, in part because of John McCain's message, and I wanted to make sure that his message was heard again today here in Ukraine, here among people, academics, and frankly an institution that was founded in part by, right now, by Arizona State University, which is the umbrella, the mothership, the university that the McCain Institute is part of. So we are a nonprofit in Washington, D.C., but we are part of the American University family. And so it's really an honor to be here. My predecessor, once removed, Kurt Volker, was instrumental in establishing this connection between the students, the faculty, the people of Kyiv, and of course, Arizona State University in Tempe, which is right near Phoenix. And so the real message I wanted to give was that we're with you, we're still with you. And I can, of course, elaborate on that as you wish.
I want to say that all of you, some of you master students, know that we have this feature called dual degree option for our students, so they could spend their last year or second year for masters in Arizona, online, offline, and again obtain two diplomas. So imagine out of 60 masters enrolled last year, 33 decided to move to Arizona, and they will graduate from Thunderbird School in parallel. So I just want to say that Ukrainians love everything, almost everything American, as well as education. Yeah. So, Dr. Farkas, could you please share with us what program you or your team you're working in your institute? Maybe some of them connected with Ukraine in the future. So. What do you have?
I'm here today, actually, not just to remind Ukrainians that Americans are with Ukraine, including past and present senators, but also because I'm with something called the McCain Institute Business Alliance for Ukraine. And this is a group of private sector companies who are either tech companies like Microsoft or Amazon, or they are defense tech companies like Palantir, which is on the software side, or Skydio, which you may know because they help you with drones, or Fortnum because they provide drone shields. And all of these companies are operating in Ukraine right now, and they are all providing, I think all of them are providing services, most of them are providing services for free, not all of them. But Microsoft has been providing services to the Ukrainian government and the Ukrainian people for free, millions of dollars of services since this latest phase of the war, so about over a year. And that's also the case for Palantir, which helps with data. We had several meetings already today. The most recent one was with the Ukrainian Prosecutor General, where they use the data that Palantir provides to build cases so that Ukrainians who have been violated by the Russian war, by the Russian actions, whether it's their property, their person, other rights that they have, that they will see some accountability, that the Prosecutor General will work with the international community. We also have meetings with the Minister of Defense and many others in your government, as well as in your RADA, and civil society and journalists as well. So we are really trying to find out how we can help Ukraine. Ukraine is a frontline democracy, and we have a program that focuses on support for democracy, and it focuses on frontline democracies, and Ukraine is at the front of the front line. And we understand that what you are doing here, fighting for your sovereignty, for your rights, is not just for Ukraine. We know that it's for, frankly, the world. We do not want to fight Russia. We want Ukraine to defeat this Russian foreign policy and to defeat Russia so that we don't have to end up dealing with Russia on a battlefield in the future, which to many Americans sounds far-fetched. It sounds like something that is inconceivable, but I myself, I always explain, to me it's not inconceivable because I'm Eastern European American. So my parents were Hungarian refugees. They fled Hungary in 1956. They didn't think that they would lose their lives, that they would have to flee their country. They didn't think they would, of course, experience World War II and then the communism and the revolution and the failed revolution and then immigration. But what it teaches us who are from this part of the world is that nothing is certain. History can repeat itself. And so with that Eastern European mentality, I try to explain to people that humans haven't changed, unfortunately, and history can repeat itself if we don't stick to and fortify the institutions that we set up after World War II to try to prevent a third global war. And the American side of me, of course, means that I believe we will prevail because I'm an optimistic American and we will solve all these problems together. And the other thing I could say is we make character-driven leaders, and I want to just take a minute to talk about the Ukrainian character-driven leaders we just had in our program. So it's a very small program, about 26 to 29 students individuals. These are mid-career and rising. So we had Colonel Kovalenko, Hennady Kovalenko. He's about to become a general. He was our fellow last year. He's working in the Ministry of Defense. We had Dr. Maria Levchenko last year. She's a peace builder, and we actually just had the opportunity to host her in Phoenix for the Relentless Courage photojournalism exhibit, which brought to the people and the students in Arizona directly and viscerally the horror that you all have experienced here in your country with this war and the way the Russians are waging it. So we also speak out for dissidents. We have certainly many of the Russians who are kept in jail right now who would like a different future for their country and oppose this war, who called it a war, and that's why they're in war. So Vladimir Kara-Murza, he's one who called this a war, not a special operation. And he was the pallbearer in Senator McCain's funeral. He was is a Russian opposition politician who's in jail. So we also kind of advocate for those people, name their names, call on our government to do what they can to assist them. So those are just some examples.
Dr. Farkas, you advised to Secretary of Defense and the U.S. President on the U.S. reaction to Russian invasion to Ukraine during this annexation of Crimea 2014-15. So looking back to this 10 years experience, what conclusions did the U.S. draw? So, and second part, is the U.S. already doing something differently, or what should U.S. do differently in the future? So what are your thoughts?
Well, I think that the United States learned, first, we have to remember that before Russia invaded Ukraine, in 2008, Russia invaded the Republic of Georgia and occupied 20% of the Georgian territory, which it continues to occupy today. Russia is also trying to take over Georgia by using political and political means and money right now because they couldn't succeed militarily, which is also something that Ukraine experienced. So it will be interesting to see what happens in Georgia going forward. But nevertheless, the United States and our European allies, we did not understand what was happening in 2008. Then in 2014, when Putin illegally annexed, for the first time since World War II, did an Anschluss, stole Crimea from Ukraine, forcibly tried to alter international borders. It was shocking to the international community. But unfortunately, we still, at that point, didn't fully comprehend how we should respond. Now, those of us who understood what Putin's objectives were, that he wanted to recreate the Soviet empire, that he wanted a neo-imperial vision to be achieved, we were quite concerned, and we recognized that we had to stand firm against Vladimir Putin. And so it took us a while to figure out exactly how we should best protect Ukraine and all of the other countries that Russia had aggressive sights on. And frankly, we didn't know how much, we understood in the Pentagon, I understood that Vladimir Putin wanted a weak American democracy or no American democracy, that he had that desire. I didn't fully understand that he would actually take the risky step of attacking American democracy using social media and other indirect means. We knew probably bribery and trying to influence officials, but when he really tried to get involved in our elections in 2016, that was a shock even to someone like me because I didn't think that Putin would take such a risk, but he did. And certainly, so we've learned over time what Putin is capable of, what his designs are. I think that the US government has learned that the way to minimize the threat from Putin is actually to stand up to him, to be firm, but that took a while. And we've learned to do a better job sharing information with our allies, with our partners like Ukraine, and with the world. So when the annexation occurred and then Putin started this other war, another phase of it in Donbass, the US government was used to keeping all the intelligence we had through our satellites and other means really to ourselves and a few other countries, not even all of NATO. And so General Breedlove, I know, who's been your guest here, he had to go and buy commercial satellite surveillance so we could share it with our allies and to explain, look, this is what Russia's doing, see with your own eyes. We have come very far from that. This administration, the Biden administration, really leaned forward and warned the world about what Russia was going to do before Russia even did it, at least with the latest phase of the invasion. And the Biden administration has been really much more focused on explaining, showing the world what Russia's capable of. Certainly Ukraine has helped because your people have documented the horrors of this war. I mentioned the Relentless Courage book and the exhibit, but there's so many examples. The international media came in also and was able to document what happened. So we have all learned collectively, our government, our society, that we can't wish Vladimir Putin away. That unfortunately he's a threat. He's the most immediate threat, frankly, to the United States and the international order. There are other threats, and frankly, those threats will only grow if Vladimir Putin prevails. So, for example, President Xi in China will be emboldened to take his own territorial, aggressive action if Vladimir Putin gets away with what he's doing right now.
You mentioned that you met with newly appointed Minister of Defense of Ukraine.
We're going to.
Going to, okay. So, but you used to work as a Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense, and you know probably this region quite well, because of your responsibility for. So how do you see, what is your assessment of efficiency of our Ministry of Defense in general? Previous one, new person you will meet, so how do you think that they are kind of successful in their collaboration, interactions with US side, counterparties, and so on?
There's been tremendous change in Ukraine, I think just really in the last year plus since the full frontal invasion. Although before that, there was reform. There were changes that were made in the Ministry of Defense and in Ukrainian society. And your war that you are having been forced to wage is very much here on this side of the border and all of society war. And this, President Zelensky was elected on a platform of trying to bring peace, but then also of rooting out corruption. And I think what we've seen is that the Ukrainian people, Ukrainian society, the Ukrainian politicians have remained committed, the Ukrainian government, to fighting corruption and to strengthening rule of law. It's difficult, it takes a lot of work, and it's good that the Ukrainian people put pressure on their government and that they're impatient, because that's your job. They work for you. And in America, we have problems also with corruption and rule of law, and every day Americans try to put government under pressure to do better. It will mean reform of institutions, but you're also doing something very clever that is, we call it leapfrogging, when you can jump ahead of the rest of the world. And you are leapfrogging using technology. And what you have done with your DIA app and all of the other things that you have instituted in terms of technology, that will go so far. I know you started with ProZero and the procurement system. And if the military can also, have all of those systems in place, that will reduce corruption. It will increase accountability, and it will make the Ukrainian people and those supporting you be able to maintain the trust they have in you right now for the long run. You have to work for it too, and your government has to work for it. It never ends, but if you put these processes in place and you change the culture, then you can extend it into the future, which is what we all need to do. Every day we have to fight against corruption in every society, and every day we have to fight to uphold the rule of law. So I really commend the Ukrainian people, your government, your society, for embracing technology and using it, frankly, to bring you forward far ahead of many other countries. People are saying now the system here is more advanced than Estonia's, and that was the one that was famous for being advanced in terms of digital, managing services. So I think that there's reason for hope, and the new minister, I hope that he will not only help with rule of law, accountability, but also help Ukraine figure out how to establish a new modern defense industry, not a Soviet one with lots of layers of bureaucracy, but one that relies on the entrepreneurship that we've seen from regular Ukrainians, where small businesses can compete to provide services and goods to the Ukrainian government, and where your businesses can team with American businesses, whether they're small businesses or large businesses. We already have an environment where American companies are, as I said, providing assistance for free, or some have contracts with the Ukrainian government, and it's working very well, and we would like that to continue, because I think that is the road to economic recovery for Ukraine.
What are your suggestions maybe for our humble institution, that in terms of if we have a goal to have a broad cooperation between our defense sector and US companies, financial institutions, so what should we pay attention on? I mean, what directions, what programs, maybe some, I don't know, management or anti-corruption, or you're probably familiar with all of the programs of ASU, so we also have access to them. So what are your suggestions?
Yeah, I think management programs, obviously accounting, anything that deals with rule of law, anything that deals with anti-corruption. I think ethics, people always want to focus on the skills or the tangible technical capabilities that students need to learn, but you also need to learn about ethics, about how to be a leader. You mentioned our program, our McCain Global Leaders program, and I told you about the 2 Ukrainians who went through. They can sit here and tell you all about what it is to be a character-driven leader, not a generic leader, somebody who leads by sticking to their values and making decisions based on those values. Senator McCain was that kind of person. He didn't care who he upset. He didn't care what he risked. He would make the right decision and do the right thing based on his values. And his values told him that all humans are equal, all humans have universal rights, and that all humans, each human has the potential to change something in the world, in their community or in the world. And so I would say that don't forget the humanities, don't forget the soft side as well. And then you could think about approaching some of the US businesses to see if you can have internships, where they will take on students even for several months, a summer, where the students can see how things operate in a company that is protected by rule of law, and what's the interaction between the company and the authorities, and the tax authorities and the various other authorities that govern how a company operates.
For your information, some of our students already had internships in RAND Corporation, if I'm correct, and part of them in NATO. And yes, but we are kind of looking for kind of expansion, especially to defense giants like you have in Arizona or in the United States. So we have a little bit another direction of questions. So what impact does populism have on kind of geopolitics, on the kind of global democracy? So because you probably, what dangerous trends do you see in the spread of populism, Trump, Putin, Orban, and bolstered by these cyber wars and launched logically by Russia and probably China. So what do you think about populism? Is it dangerous or?
Yes, you were leading the witness, as they say. But yes, populism is dangerous because populism is an argument that one man or one person or a national idea can prevail rather than a competition of ideas, rather than working with people who are different than you are inside your society to achieve what's best for everyone. And populism often has a us versus them component of it, and as I said, the strong man, and it's usually always a man, and it's very close to fascism oftentimes, but you can have populism without fascism, of course. And but we tend to think that populism it doesn't require critical thinking, and so it doesn't really bring out the best in people. If you want to bring out the best in your citizens, then we believe that a competition of ideas that you have under a democracy that's not populist is best. Of course, you can be patriotic, but that's different from being populist. And the populists also, as they have in the past, tend to derive strength from one another, just as we democracies derive strength from one another as well. And so if Vladimir Putin, who's more than a populist, he's really a fascist, he's a war criminal, but if he's defeated, populists who look to him for inspiration will also feel the impact, and they will feel less strong. And there will be other leaders who might have chosen a populist path to power that might actually try to achieve power the harder way by competing.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Farkas. And probably the last, more global question. So we know that one of the three pillars of the McCain Institute is advancing character-driven leaders. So we are at the AUK also pay attention to global leadership. You heard already about quantity of students chosen the Arizona State for this program. And what should Ukraine do on the national-wide scale to be able to join this club of leading countries who will set the global agenda in kind of hopefully this century?
So I think the best thing you can do is to do everything very quickly to join the European Union. The European Union has opened the door to Ukraine. It's amazing. I mean, what change has been brought about? You asked me a question about what the United States learned in the last year plus. It's amazing to see what the Europeans, you know, the Western Europeans in particular, have learned and how they've suddenly woken up to the fact that Vladimir Putin is a threat to them and that Ukraine is Europe and that they need to help bring you into the European institutions. And so the European Union is the #1 goal, I would say, because the European Union will also help you become a modern, rule of law abiding, non-corrupt state, which will mean prosperity for your people. It will mean more, frankly, stability that comes with rule of law. And it will mean more wealth for Ukrainians. It will mean, I think, more security also for other Eastern European countries. So I think it's exciting to watch how the European Union has extended this offer and how quickly your country has worked to achieve all of the technical things that need to be put in place right now. So I would say just keep doing that and do it faster. And if your students want to learn quickly about what it will be like to run a business in a place where there's rule of law, maybe they can volunteer to help the government or work for the government on implementing those laws. The other part of it, of course, is security, and security will be important for the future prosperity of Ukraine as well. And my belief, and I've written this on paper, I actually think we could make Ukraine a NATO member today, but it's not realistic because nobody else agrees with me, meaning most of the heads of state of other governments think that the war must be over before Ukraine becomes a member. I don't think that's the case because I think there are ways to get around that, but it is also hard because we have had instances in the past where if we try to draw lines, then the enemy will try to use that against us in the middle of negotiating, for example, a security arrangement. And we had that problem in the Balkans when Bosnia was trying to have its borders established, and then the Serbs would fight to change the borders in the middle of the negotiation. So it maybe is too hard to do right now, but certainly Ukraine is the largest, most NATO operable, battle-hardened, capable military in all of Europe. You should be a member of NATO. We have a lot to learn from you.
Yeah, so first to join European Union, second security. Correct. Okay, so now it's time to invite our guests to ask the questions. So please, brief and to the point. Yes, thank you.
Hello, my name is Natalia. First of all, thank you for being here, specifically at AUK and in Ukraine in general. Thank you for your support. My question is about the international institutions. When this full-scale invasion started, it became clear that they doesn't work as they're supposed to after the United Nations, first of all. So the international order that many countries agreed upon after the Second World War doesn't work anymore, because when someone breaks the rule, everything breaks down. So my question is, do you think that something will change in this international order and these big, large-scale international organizations after the war in Ukraine, or probably during the war in Ukraine? I understand that it couldn't be very fast, like in a day, in a week or so, but probably you know that it is some discussions are starting there, that something will change, who should lead this process, and how the new international order could look like.
Well, you're absolutely right when you say that what the international community has demonstrated in its response to the war here in Ukraine starting in 2014 is the failure of the international community to deter and then certainly to stop the kind of aggression that Russia has waged against the Ukrainian people, especially, of course, in the last year plus, with using methods like torture, rape, abduction of children, abduction of adults, forced repatriation, The list goes on. These are all violations of human rights, and they're an assault on an entire ethnic group. So in effect, it does add up to a genocidal war. And we said at the end of World War II, never again. We said no making war without insignia. That's one thing that the Russians violated already in Crimea when they invaded. We said, of course, no murder, no genocide, etc. I think that the international order still has a chance to survive, and that's if we get accountability for Ukraine and the Ukrainian people. We, as an international community of people who respect human rights and democracy, although there are some democracies that respect human rights, and we can work with them as long as they will respect human rights and stand with us and stand with Ukraine. We must stand up, and we must make sure that there is accountability, because there's been too much impunity. We met with Prosecutor General Kostin earlier today, and we said to him, we are very mindful that Ukraine now is fighting for the rest of us. Your fight for accountability means that you make it less possible for other countries to do what Russia has done to you, to new groups of people. But at the same time, you are also going to get accountability. You are also going to open the door for accountability for Syrians and for Chechens and for Rohingya, peoples who have not yet received accountability. And part of the process of rebuilding has to be restoring accountability. The international order will not survive if we cannot hold Vladimir Putin and the people who helped him do this accountable. That much is clear. It is true that it will take some time, but we already have, an international warrant out for Vladimir Putin's arrest for abducting children. And as you all know, that's just unfortunately, one small part of all the crimes that Russia has committed. And there will probably be more indictments and perhaps arrests and hopefully cases, prosecutions, and people like Vladimir Putin going to jail, really being held accountable.
Dr. Farkas, again, I want to shine to Ukrinform, that's the national news agency in Ukraine. I have really a bunch of questions to you, but I'll stick to two at least, as a political expert of your level. First of all, it's about domestic American policy. We've been following really closely the latest events, latest developments in the House. And we figured that the sacking of Speaker Kevin McCarthy is delaying the process of, first of all, considering those 12 bills for funding the government, because there's the need to elect a new speaker, and therefore it also delays the consideration of additional aid for Ukraine. As someone who definitely knows the political kitchen in the United States, I wanted to ask you, how critical do you believe is the current situation with that delay? Because we know that every day matters in terms of deliveries, lethal assistance, speaking of ATACMS and other capabilities. So yeah, this is the first question. And the other one is linked to foreign policy. As one is about Iran. We know that the Institute for the Study of War warned us that on October 18th, the restriction expires set by the UN on the supplies of missiles, talking about hypersonic missiles, from Iran to Russia. The potential deal that has not yet happened. Do you believe that the US government is going to make some resolute action to either hamper or prevent those deals from happening in the future?
Those are both great questions. With regard to the US domestic context, so the House of Representatives is broken. They don't have a leader right now. That's because the Republican Party has been hijacked by the far right, which is basically it's a negative agenda of countering, of course, the Democratic president, but also just they don't have a positive agenda. So they don't want aid to Ukraine, but there's no explanation of why. And so it's lacking in a real ideological content or debate. It's just emotional, populism, I guess is the right term. And so I do worry because even though, okay, so let me say this. There are still enough votes in the Senate and in the House. There's still a bipartisan majority of legislators who support providing assistance to Ukraine, providing military assistance, economic assistance, and diplomatic assistance. So there's no question there. But these people they're frankly, whether it's witting or unwitting, they're helping Vladimir Putin by questioning the assistance to Ukraine. And so we just have to counter it. We have to counter it with more arguments explaining to the American people what's at stake. You know, we need to do it with our European allies and with our Ukrainian friends and partners as well. And I would argue that we need to provide fewer opportunities for Congress to, or for these fringe people to create trouble. And that means that we should not ask for, the administration should not ask for 24 billion. They should go back and cross that number out and you know, put in something like 100 billion or whatever it takes to get to the next fiscal year, because we are just playing into the hands of these extremists if we have this negotiation over and over again. So that would be my one response, is really the support for Ukraine is still high. The American people, it seems more distant because they're not seeing the horror playing out on CNN every night anymore. And as we get closer to the elections, the US elections, that will be what they see. So I do think we have to all, though, work on making sure Americans understand what's at stake. And that means also using connections that you have, you know, to Americans to make sure that people continue to understand. It's frankly a danger to the United States, but that argument doesn't always get through. People think that we can isolate ourselves and that the bad guys won't come for us when they are coming for us every day. So another one of those bad guys is, of course, Iran. It's shocking to me to see how Iran seems to be sliding into this ability to provide weapons to Russia, as is now North Korea, I guess, in the face of sanctions. As you said, the sanctions on Iran will lapse, and I think the United States has to have a robust response. I don't know what they have planned. I certainly also, if I were Ukraine, would be reaching out to countries like Israel, who clearly would also be alarmed and would maybe be more willing to take some direct action against any potential facilities. They don't want Iranian drones, then that drone technology providing more wealth to the Iranian coffers and more experience to the Iranian engineers. And so there's an argument that we all should be reaching out to anyone who considers Iran an enemy and a danger, even if they're not, you know, Israel has not been the best partner when it comes to sanctions, but we should try to bring them in closer. And that does get me to sanctions. I mean, that is one area where we should do better as well in terms of supporting Ukraine, because the US government, we are doing what we think we can, but there's probably always more that we can do, and faster.
Hello, I'm Ksenia, I'm a journalist from Sweden. You stressed once again with our foreign partners about Ukraine that is fighting not for Ukraine, it's fighting for the normal, adequate, democratic world. But my question is, I just got back from Baltic countries, and but they really do understand the risks and threats towards their countries. They're not just sympathizing towards Ukraine, like in most Western European countries, for example, societies. My question is, do they really understand the risks and threats towards their countries from Russian Federation, and support Ukraine not just because of sympathizing with Ukrainian people, all these atrocities and all that, but because they're aware that the next country might be someone, for example, let's say Hungary, that forgot the historical context of communication with Soviets and so on. So my question, why do you think the government do understand, the partners from officials do understand, but societies in some countries still do not understand the real threat towards their country? How to change this gap in information, why it happens still, and what do you advise to the governments of these countries to have this communication with society? Thank you.
I mean, I think we all just need to explain to the Americans and Western Europeans that that the Russian government, that this leader is like other neo-imperial leaders, like Adolf Hitler, who had to be stopped because otherwise he would keep trying to take more territory and take more power. And that Vladimir Putin, if he gets his way in Ukraine, he will turn and he will take Georgia, he will take Moldova, and then he will want to weaken NATO, because NATO is the only collective security alliance that can stand up to Russia. And he knows that. And so he will try to challenge NATO, and then we will have to come to the assistance of Poland or a Baltic state. And that will mean that we are now at war with Russia. So I think I go on television in the United States all the time and explain that. I speak to groups like this and explain it, and they look and they understand. But they need to be, they need to be told that over and over again by many more people than just me. They need to hear it on television. They need to understand also history. Why am I so convinced that Vladimir Putin could do that? Because it's very similar to things we saw in the history before. But you have to know history, and you have to have understood how history unfolded in the past to be able to say, there's something similar here, right? And so I think in America, we probably need to do a better job reminding people of this history, which isn't as recent as it was when I was growing up, because I'm 55 now. And I have older parents who actually grew up during the war, and even my father prior to the war. So it's honestly, it just has to be a constant conversation, constant explanation. And it's a question of leadership. You know, I would very much like President Biden to give this kind of speech every day, if he could. Because I think that the American people, they do look to their leaders, and they look to them to explain. Because what I just explained is an interest-based argument, and then there's the values-based argument. And both are important. Our values, our interests reflect our values are, an extension of our interests, if you will. So these things are just need to be repeated. And universities like this are very important, and all of you should go and, if you can leave Ukraine and explain to the world, or get on the social media and explain, as you did in the Baltics, but go to Boston instead.
Go to universities. So probably last question, or yes.
Thank you for being today. I'm a master's student from American University and Arizona State University for this year. And I would like to continue the last question about the informational gap. To win this war, we need weapons, and to have weapons, we need a positive perception of United States citizens, politics, establishment, and so on. And there is also about accountability and responsibility of us, from our side, to communicate very clearly some messaging, to deliver some things that we will ensure that we will win this perception. And it's like to work with a very broad audience, because there's a lot of Americans who actually don't care about Eastern Europe. They didn't know about Ukraine before the war started. There are a lot of people who think that it's something like below to Russia, like Ukraine, something like a post-Soviet country. And even more, there are a lot of Ukrainians who leave Ukraine like 5-10 years ago, and they lived like tremendously different country, because like changing a lot and changing like very fast now. So maybe it's like your personal advice, because you communicated like every day and you're really the true ambassador of Ukraine and bringing democracy. How do you think, what should we deliver like a message on the government level, on private sector level, to win the perception that we are this frontline country of democracy and we are a different country and we will strengthen the democracy world?
I think that what you could do is, it's kind of like an advertising campaign, and literally you could run advertisements in the United States just showing the new Ukraine, just showing what you've done with technology. Americans would be really surprised. and that your society has embraced this technology. You're not afraid of it, because in America we are very afraid of new technology unless it's games, you know, like Game Boy, whatever. And I also think investing in your arts. So this photo exhibit, which the embassy helped arrange, you know, came to me and said, can you help us bring it to Arizona? That's powerful. Having filmmakers do films about what's happening in Ukraine, and you have done that already, but don't stop, keep going. You know, your president, he does it every day. I mean, he never stops. He gives a speech one day and he doesn't say, okay, now I'm done with my speech for the month, because no, he knows there are new audiences and he has to go back to that earlier audience and remind them, and it's tiring. But if you get your society involved, your artists, your filmmakers, your documentary producers, and get your politicians involved also in just, you know, politician to politician, sharing stories and really telling the optimistic story about Ukraine and where Ukraine is going. Americans love to be on the side of the underdog who's winning. And frankly, Ukraine is the underdog who's winning. I don't think Americans fully comprehend that. People who oppose assistance to Ukraine, they don't understand. They're backing the loser by opposing Ukraine. They're going to be on the losing side of history, but you guys are the cool country. You know, you are very much on the cutting edge. So I will just leave it at that. Ukraine is the cool country that we all want to hang out with in the future. So thank you for what you're doing for all of us, and Slava Ukraina.
Yeah, so what I've learned, so first of all, join the European Union. Second, the security armed forces of Ukraine, yes. Then creative industries, probably. I would like to thank Dr. Evelyn Farkas for joining us, and also students and our guests for joining us today. So I do believe it was very interesting. It is a great honor to host you in our campus. We all want to create a better world, better Ukraine, better entire world, better Ukraine, and better for all mankind. So thank you.
Thank you.